Okay, we'll begin. Are there questions?
Yeah, so
Yes, go ahead, please.
I don't think quite that we have solved the horizon problem with inflation. Could you describe what is happening with the particles during the inflation? Are there any these standard model particles and radiation during that time or not?
No, because everything is diluted away, right? During the inflation.
Yeah, so that is a problem, I think, because like we started off saying that consider today 2 points on the opposite side of the last scattering sphere
Yes,
at distance 2 RL from each other.
yes,
And we showed that the horizon just evolving the universe in the radiation to the last scattering is not sufficient. Like the horizon at A up until the last horizon is not reaching B.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
So we like argue that there must be some mechanism through which the horizon at A touches B.
Okay, yes.
And for that, a proposed solution is inflation. But the whole argument was based on that there is some sort of a thermal equilibrium process going on.
Yeah. So the point in this case, you don't need thermal equilibrium. So what happens is the following, right? So let's suppose that you have the horizon. Suppose this is the horizon. And if you look at the inflation potential, V versus phi, so in this, okay, this is almost flat. I didn't draw it correctly. This is a flat potential. So basically what this is saying is that within a horizon, suppose this is a horizon size, okay, that within a horizon, okay, phi becomes uniform.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what inflation does.
Yeah. So the answer to our horizon problem is sorry. The answer to our like why we see isotropic CMB. We
Yes,
argued that it was homogeneous at that time, the universe in
yes,
radiation.
yes.
And the answer for that is not thermal equilibrium, but rather, okay, one part is thermal equilibrium once lambda goes beyond lambda I, but there is an initial condition which is set by the inflation.
No, see, whatever initial condition you put, initially we don't assume that phi is uniform.
No, no, initial condition I meant for radiation era. Like
Yeah,
inflation
yeah,
sets the universe to be homogeneous.
exactly. Yeah. So the inflation, what it does is that it sets phi to be uniform within a horizon scale. Okay.
Yeah, so now we don't even need that 2RL sort of a bound. Like we argued that the lambda star by lambda I is found like the bound is found by demanding that RH goes over RL to RL.
Yes,
But
exactly.
that is not needed anymore. If inflation, all that inflation does is homogenizes the whole world universe.
But only within the horizon scale.
Yeah, but even if that horizon is smaller, we as long as the initial condition for the radiation era is set to be homogeneous, it will evolve into homogeneous thing.
No, no, it will not. See, I'll tell you why it's not going to be homogeneous. So what happens is the following. So let's imagine, okay, that there are different patches, okay, in which phi's differ, okay, as the universe is rolling. Okay, so here it's phi equal to phi 1, here phi equal to phi 2, and so on. Then what happens is that as it rolls, okay, it exits inflation at different times, right? Suppose phi 1 is less than phi 2. Okay, so suppose this is phi 1. Suppose this is phi 1 and this is phi 2. Then this region will exit the inflation first, right? And then this region will exit later. The universe is evolving. So what's going to happen is that the effective temperature in these different regions will be different. Is that point clear? Because
And in
see this region, right? Suppose this region is phi 2, right? So this region goes into radiation dominated era first, okay? And its energy density starts getting depleted as 1 over lambda to the 4, right? But at that time, this is still in the inflationary phase. Okay, so the energy density is constant. So if this exists later, then what's going to happen is that the energy density here will be larger than the energy density here, because at the same time t, the energy density here has gotten depleted, but the energy density here hasn't gotten depleted. So that's the way, that's what is needed. So that you need that the horizon size should be big enough so that the phi within that, so that phi is uniform over this horizon size. And that is what is guaranteeing that the temperatures that you see in different regions, different directions in the sky are the same.
Okay. I
Right?
mean, so
If
we
phi had a
cannot
fluctuation, then
can
there
be in two different patches.
exactly in these two different patches, the inflation will end at two different times. And as a result, what will happen is that their effective temperatures will differ. Because the energy density here will start falling off before the energy density here starts falling off. Right? So you are right that it is not a thermal equilibrium at this stage, right? Because here it's the uniformity of phi that that is guaranteed by inflation, okay? And you need the horizon size to be big enough so that phi is uniform within the horizon size. And once phi is set to be uniform, then the temperature will be uniform because the different regions of the universe will evolve in the same way.
I mean, this again is like an initial value thing. Like even if A and B, like two opposite ends of the last scattering sphere, were not on the same initial horizon, this phi horizon,
Yes.
they could have had the same phi value.
Yeah, they could have had. They could have had. But then that you have to set by hand.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah.
Right? Whereas if it's inside the horizon, then it would explain why it is uniform. Right? That's the only difference. The inflation gives a natural way to set this initial condition where phi is uniform. Okay, whatever initial condition you have, right? That is uniform over the over this patch of sky that we see. Right? And that's the main aspect of inflation that we are using here.
Okay.
So,
Yes.
what is mediating the interaction between the two phi regions? I mean, two regions that contains phi field. I mean, are they phi fields or the gravity itself?
Well, phi interacts with gravity and it can have self interaction, but here, of course, the interaction is very small, right? So here, imagine that here phi was interacting, and to begin with, you can say that that different regions of the horizon are different values of phi. Okay, here it was phi 1, here it was phi 2, here it was phi 3, and so on. Okay. That, I mean, there will be some interactions here, and that could have made uniform phi uniform within the horizon patches there. And now the point is this patch is getting blown up to enormous size. And that's what is inflation is doing. So phi, which was uniform over very short ranges earlier, by the time the inflation ends, it becomes uniform over a very large range. And that effectively sets the initial condition that phi is uniform, over the CMB sky. So the interaction could have been any kind, right? Self-interaction of phi, for example, which will happen here. Right? Here, because V of phi is almost constant, phi is nearly non-interacting. Only interaction here we assume is with gravity. Is this clear? Well, it's with gravity, and also, of course, you should remember that the Hamiltonian has a half grad phi square term, right? This, of course, you cannot avoid. So if any gradient of phi, right, tends to be minimized, right? If you want to minimize the Hamiltonian. So there is a natural tendency for the fields to uniformize itself, because of this term, gradient term in the Hamiltonian, but that can only take place over a horizon. Okay, this term is not enough to make phi uniform over distance scales that is larger than the horizon.
Okay, yeah.
Is that okay? I mean, was that your question?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so this, for example, is one term in the Hamiltonian that would tend to uniformize phi.
Also, like, how do we determine that V naught, or do we set it?
You set it. It depends. Well, I mean, nature, of course, doesn't set it. Nature has some V naught, right? but we don't know offhand what V naught is, right? Because you haven't studied the theory at that high a scale. So you have to basically guess, right? You set some V naught and then work with it.
So like what do we set it? Like roughly?
Well, see, when inflation was proposed, right, people took it to be 10 to the 16 GeV. That's the scale, right? So V naught, which has the energy density, will be 10 to the 16 GeV to the 4. But this came because people are studying grand unification at that time, right? Came from grand unification theories. But I mean, there is no reason here why inflation had to take place at the grand unification scale, right? It can take place anywhere between 100 GeV and Planck scale. So there is really nothing really tells us what V naught is.
Like 10 to the 16 is V naught or the temperature?
Well, yeah, temperature was 10 to the 16 GeV. So by V naught has that, this is energy density, right?
Yeah.
Energy per unit volume. So that has a dimension of energy to the 4. So the natural value of V naught is 10 to the 16 GeV to the 4.
Okay.
See, if temperature is this, right? Then the energy
universal constant is of no relevance.
Pardon?
There is a k to the 4 thing, right? So that k is not of relevance.
No, K is not, in dimensionless units, K you can say of order 1. It's made after all of fundamental constants, right?
Okay. Yeah.
H bar C, KB, etc.
Yeah. Okay.
So also one thing, we said that during this inflationary phase, phi of V of phi sets the cosmological constant there. And for now, the value of phi at the bottom of this potential is the cosmological constant value.
Yeah,
And
not value of phi, value of V phi.
Value of V phi.
Yes. Yes.
So if that is that is what we set by hand, then why do we have a hard time explaining cosmological constant?
No. So if once you accept that, then you don't have a hard time explaining cosmological constant. Okay? But the issue that people try to explain is why is it so small, right? Because as I described, that this height, right, in natural units, so it's like 10 to the minus 120 in natural units. M Planck to the 4. And it's this number that bothers people, right? Of course, you can set it by hand. Theoretically, nothing prevents you from setting it equal to 10 to the minus 120. But if you are trying to get it from some fundamental theory, right, then the question would be, why is it so small? Who said it's so small? Right? Not that you cannot accommodate a cosmological constant or the value of the potential in the theory. Right?
But then we should also worry about the whole the graph of potential itself.
Certainly, yes. This is of course an assumption, right? But here you can say, okay, this 10 to the 16 GeV is not very far from Planck scale, right? Okay, Planck scale is 10 to the 19 GeV. So, okay, you still have a factor of 10 to the 3, but that you can accommodate, right? Or you can increase it even a little bit more, 10 to the 17 or 18, so that you still have some control. Okay. At 10 to the 19, of course, everything is strongly coupled, so you cannot do any calculations. But you can take this to be large, right? So the issue is what sets the scale so small. But you are right that this whole potential, of course, is an assumption, right? It may not even have happened this way. It's just that if you assume that something like this happened, then a lot of the puzzles that you encounter get resolved. And similarly, as long as you assume that the minimum of the potential is this, that explains cosmological constant. Okay? But it's a somewhat unnatural value because, for example, the vacuum energy, right? The 0 point energy, right? That contributes to the cosmological constant, and that's huge. That's typically again of order M Planck to the 4. If you think of the Planck mass as a cutoff, right, then you naturally expect quantum corrections to generate corrections of order M Planck to the 4. So somehow everything is cancelling and giving this small number, and that's what bothers people.
Okay, yeah.
But as long as we accept that this is what nature gives and this we work with it, right? There's no theoretical difficulty in accommodating this in our equations.
So,
Yes, go ahead, please.
sir, when do we actually need a quantum mechanical treatment of gravity? Like, we don't need it here because we are demanded that V naught is less than Planck scale, like the mass Planck
Yeah.
to the 4.
So when at energies of order 10 to the 19 GeV, we genuinely need a quantum theory of gravity.
Yeah, but when does that happen? It does not anywhere near that happens in the lab, but like,
Okay, it doesn't happen there, but for example, even at 10 to the 16 GeV, right? It's a factor of 10 to the 3, right?
yeah.
So quantum fluctuations of gravity may still be important. And in fact, one can show that if V0 is 10 to the 16 GeV, then the fluctuations of graviton at that time would have given rise to what is called the tensor perturbation. And that will show up in CMB sky. So if V0 was really 10 to the 16 GeV, right, we will probably see this. We'll probably see the effect of that in future CMB experiments by observing tensor perturbation. So this tensor, okay, this I will discuss later, but roughly it's some kind of fluctuations of the CMB spectrum, which can only be produced by fluctuation of a gravitational field. Whereas the normal fluctuations that we see at present can be attributed to fluctuation of a scalar field, right? Which could be just phi itself.
Okay.
Any other question?
Hello, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So for flatness problem, you basically said that we are comparing two terms, the curvature term k by a0 squared, that term, and the radiation dominated term. So in that term, the k term is very small. So that's why we are saying that it is some kind of problem or some fine tuning issue.
Yes.
To solve this problem, we are using this inflationary model, but for this inflation also, we are basically fine tuning our V0 such that our lambda star is, very small, right? So basically, are we actually solving the nature of the problem, or do we just,
see, inflation solves two problems at one go, actually, at least two problems in one go, right? Because
yes,
it solves
true.
also the horizon problem.
Yes.
Okay, so it is true that inflation is an assumption, right? We haven't seen such scalar fields and such flat potential. But if we assume that there is such flat potential, then it can solve several problems at one go.
Okay, but the nature of the flatness problem is still there, right? Inside the inflation.
Yeah, exactly. But okay, this we'll discuss again later, right? Here I have presented it in a way that it's a somewhat unnatural potential, right? Because it's a flat potential. But as we will see, that even m square phi square can generate inflation. Okay, even a potential like m square phi square can generate inflation over a certain range of phi. But for this, you have to do a detailed study of inflation, right? When can we say that the universe is as if it's in a cosmological dominated phase? So it's not such unnatural potential that one needs for inflation necessarily.
Okay.
Sir, and we'll see later.
Okay. And sir, another question is that for cosmological constant dominated era, say, and now that lambda has to be greater than 1. Larger lambda. But for inflation period, the lambda is below 10 to the minus 15 order, right? So when we are saying that this inflation happens and then the potential is at the minima, and then we are saying that this is the cosmological constant, but assume that we have another field which is always constant. So that will also contribute in the present acceleration of the universe, right?
Yeah.
This
so this V of phi, I'm including the everything, right? So you can think of this V, right? See, this is just one term in the Lagrangian, right?
Yes.
Okay. So in the Lagrangian, right, you have an integral d4x times v, right? This v in general is a function of phi 1, phi 2, and many other things. And when I say the value of the potential at the minimum, it's the minimum with respect to all the fields. it doesn't make sense typically to talk about the potential for individual fields, right? Is that I mean, I've drawn it in this simple manner, okay, assuming that all the other fields are frozen because they are already at their minimum. Okay? And only one field had a reasonably flat potential so that it can roll. But when I say is the value of the potential at the minimum, it's really the full potential of all the fields. Okay? And this typically also includes quantum corrections, right? I mean, this is what we really call the effective potential, okay, where we also include the quantum corrections to the potential.
Okay, so that minima will contribute to the acceleration for the universe, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Any other question? Okay, so if not, let me then begin. Okay, so let me begin by reviewing grand canonical ensemble. Okay, basically the results, grand canonical ensemble. So the partition function, okay, was defined to be sum over alpha e to the minus beta e alpha plus mu beta n alpha. And this we can also write as integral d prime sum over n prime e to the power minus beta e prime plus mu beta n prime. And then we add the entropy, okay, which is a function of e prime, n prime, and v prime, right? E prime, n prime, and v. Okay. And then we said that a summand that this is a sharply defined integrand, okay, typically in the thermodynamic limit, in large volume limit, large V limit, the summand or the integrand is maximized, okay, at some value, say n prime equal to n and e prime equal to e, okay, and those are determined simply by maximizing the exponent. Okay. So you get del e of minus beta e plus mu beta n plus s e n v equal to 0. And similarly, del n of the same thing, minus beta e plus mu beta n plus s equal to 0. And this then gives that minus beta plus del s del e equal to 0. And mu beta plus del s del n equal to 0. Okay. And using the fact that the definition of the densities, okay, that S is V times small s, then E is V times rho, and N is V times the density. Okay. We can write these equations as minus beta, you just divide by V, both sides. So del S del rho equal to 0, and mu beta plus del S del n equal to 0. Okay, so these are the two of the relations that we had gotten also from the grand canonical ensemble. Okay. But this is what we get from the microcanonical ensemble, but it's the same relation that we get from the grand canonical ensemble. Okay. Also, from this definition of Q, which is given here, definition of Q which is given here, we can, let me write it down in the next slide. So we have Q as sum over alpha e to the minus beta E alpha plus mu beta n alpha. Okay. We see that del beta of log Q, okay, is basically the expectation value of minus E alpha minus E plus mu n. Okay. In fact, I had made a mistake last time. Okay. So this I can write as minus E plus mu n. Okay, I think I didn't write the mu n part last time. So this is what is the correct equation. Okay. And similarly, del mu of log Q is beta times expectation value of n, so which I can write as beta times n. Okay, and this is because the distributions are sharply peaked. Okay. Also, because the distribution is sharply peaked around some mean values, okay, E and n, we can write Q is equal to the width, say delta E, width of the distribution, times delta n times e to the minus beta E plus mu beta n. Okay. So if you calculate 1 over v times log Q, okay, you get 1 over v times log delta E plus log delta n minus beta E plus mu beta n. Okay. These terms go away in this, as v goes to for large v. For large v, these terms go away and or is left with minus beta rho plus, sorry, I made a mistake here. There is also a, I should have written this, the integral form. So there is also an S. So in the, now if we take the large volume limit, then these terms go away. You get minus beta rho plus mu beta n plus S. And that is basically T times P. Okay, this is using in fact, in the Grand Canonical, from the point of view of Grand Canonical ensemble, this is the definition of P. Okay. And so this gives the same relation that we got in the microcanonical ensemble, namely that S is P plus beta rho. I think something is wrong here.
It should be P over T.
So P over T, thank you. P over T, thank you. So S is P plus rho minus mu n over T. Okay, and I'm using the fact that beta is 1 over T. Is this okay? Okay, so these are the things we had already derived last time. Okay, so let me, I mean, there are a lot of relations, so let me now summarize, okay, the main points, and then we'll go on to new discussion. So summary, okay. P is 1 over v log Q. Okay, so this defines P as a function of mu and T. Okay. So this gives P as function of mu and T. Okay, because log Q naturally is expressed as a function of mu and T. Those are the entries in a Grand Canonical partition function. Then you have rho minus mu n as minus 1 over v del log Q del beta, and then you have beta n as 1 over v del log Q del mu, and S is P plus rho minus mu n over T. Okay, so these relations determine P So this determines P, this determines N, okay. This determines rho, and this determines S in terms of mu and T. Okay. And here I should just emphasize that in these, taking these derivatives, okay, we treat beta and mu as independent variables. Okay, which basically means beta mu or T mu, okay, because T is just 1 over beta, which basically means that when you're taking the derivative with respect to beta, you keep mu fixed, and when you're taking derivative with respect to mu, you keep beta fixed or T fixed. There are two other relations that we derived. Okay. Beta is del S del rho, okay, and beta mu is minus del S del N. These are not independent of the earlier relation of the, so you can derive these from these relations. Okay. But the point to remember is that in these derivatives, okay, we take rho and N as independent variables. So when you take the derivative, okay, of S with respect to rho, you have to keep N fixed, and this derivative requires keeping rho fixed. Okay. And that basically follows from the what we did here. If you look at how it came, right? We are thinking of S as a function of E, N, and V, and taking derivative with respect to E, keeping N fixed, right? That's the way you got to these relations over here. Okay, so this is something you have to keep in mind. Okay, are there questions? Okay, so now let me write down the results for the ideal gas. Okay. So first, let's look at the Bose gas. So here log Q, okay, this, I'm sure you have done it in StatMech course. In case you don't remember, you have to just look up the notes. So G, okay, maybe a few things are unfamiliar, but I'll explain where they come from. 4 pi k square dk log 1 minus to the minus beta E of k minus mu. Okay. So here G is something you may not have seen, and E. Okay. So E of k is essentially square root of k square plus m square. Normally, when you do statistical mechanics, we just replace this by the usual kinetic energy, k square by 2m, but because we will be using also relativistic gas, okay, or particles whose momentum may be comparable to their masses or much larger than their masses and so on, we'll use this general formula, okay, square root of k square plus m square, k being the magnitude of the momentum that the particle carries. So this G is the number of states for given momentum. Number of states for given momentum. Okay, so this, for example, will be 1 for scalar. Okay. But if you have a massive vector, then it's 3 because it has these 3 spin states. If there's a massless vector, then it's 2 and so on. Okay, there's a number of degrees of freedom. So that's what comes here. Okay, because while doing the calculating log Q, you have to sum over all states, right? And that depends on how many states are there for a given momentum. Okay, each particle carries how many states for a given momentum. Okay. There is a similar formula for the Fermi gas. So here log Q is V over 8 pi cube G again. Okay, this is the number of states per particle for a given momentum. Okay, so the only difference is that this sign is different. Okay, instead of minus here you have a plus, and inside the log, instead of a minus, you have a plus. Okay, are there questions? Okay, so now we'll consider a system which contains mixture of many particles. So here we'll assume, okay, of course, later on we'll see when this assumption may fail. So we assume that the particles are almost free, but have small interactions via which they can exchange energy. Okay, otherwise, of course, there'll be thermal equilibrium. Okay. So if this happens, then there is a thermal equilibrium. Okay. And this means that they have a common temperature. Okay. So, and because they are almost free, okay, because of this fact that they are almost free, we can still use the result, the log Q. Okay, so basically, let me do. So Q, okay, will be given by the product of the QIs. Okay, this just follows from the, if you look at the expression for the, if you look at the expression for the Q, the Hilbert space basically factorizes. Okay, and E alpha is the sum of the E's for individual particles, N alpha is the sum of the numbers of individual particles, and so on. Okay. So Q just becomes the product of all the Q's for different particle spaces. And what you get at the end is product of our IQI. So this means that the log Q is basically the sum of log QIs. Okay. The only point is that all the temperatures are equal. Okay, so we write Ti equal to T. So you can then have the usual equation beta Ni equal to 1 over V del mu I of log Q. Okay. And typically what the way we regard this is that we take the temperature as given and the number densities as given. Okay. And these equations can be used to solve for mu I in terms of Ni. Solve for mu I. Okay, so is this clear? So the usual statistical system, the way we describe it is we give the temperature and we give the number densities of each kind of particles. And then we make use of this equation to find out what the mu i's are in terms of ni's. And that allows us to calculate all the thermodynamic quantities. Okay, we define log Q as this, and then by taking derivatives with respect to various things, we can compute pressure, entropy, and so on. Is this clear? Are there questions?
So
Yes, go ahead, please.
since we have P and rho determined as simply through log Q, like can we restrict what sort of equations of state are possible?
What sort of equation of state are possible?
Like a priori, it could, like the relation between P and rho that we feed in by hand to the Friedman equation.
Yeah, in this case, that relation comes from Q.
Yeah, so it cannot be arbitrary, right? Or it can be still.
Well, if Q is given, see, Q can be arbitrary, right? Q depends on the calculation. For free gas, of course, it's not arbitrary.
Yeah.
But if somebody gives you Q as a function of mu and T, right, then you can find all the relationship, the rest of the thermodynamic relations, right, including the equation of state that you want to feed back into Friedman equation. But this expression for Q in terms of mu and T depends on the particular system you are dealing with.
Yeah, but there are only so many possibilities, right? It cannot be completely random or completely like anything. Like for a Bose gas, it has to have a particular structure.
Well, if it is an interacting theory, right, it can be very complicated. For free gas, of course, you only have Bose and Fermi. But it could have a complicated interaction, right, which will give a very complicated form of Q, and which will translate to a complicated relationship between rho and T. Yeah, rho and P.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, so it depends on what form Q has, right? But for most of our analysis, we will be using the simple form of Q that we wrote down: free Bose and free Fermi gas. Okay. Besides, of course, the cosmological constant, right? Which is in fact, okay, we'll not even think of this as a variable, because we'll just think of this as a constant, right? As you have seen earlier.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other question? Okay, so in this previous description, we have implicitly assumed that the particle number is conserved. That Ni is conserved. So what is Ni? Ni is the number of particles of ith type. Number of particles of ith type. Okay. But in general, this may not be the case. Okay, and the kind of systems that will be analyzed, that will certainly not be the case. Okay. Just to give an example, okay, suppose you have three types of particles. Suppose we have three types of particles. Particles which we'll call A, B, C. And we have interactions of the form A plus B goes to 2C. Okay, that A and B may collide and produce 2C particles, or 2Cs may collide and produce A and B particle. So in this case, Na, Nb, Nc are not conserved, because these numbers can change. Nevertheless, there are some conserved quantities. N1 tilde, which is Na minus Nb, and N2 tilde, which is Na plus Nb plus Nc. You can convince yourself that these are conserved. Okay, let's look at N1 tilde, right? If you have A plus B going to C plus C, right? To begin with, Na was 1, Nb was 1. So N1 tilde was 0. In the final state, Na is 0, Nb is 0. So N1 tilde is still 0, right? So N1 tilde is conserved during this process. N2 tilde, okay, the total number of A, B, and C particles, that's also conserved because you started with 2 particles and you ended up with 2 particles. So these are conserved. Okay. But individually, these are not all conserved. Is this clear? And so now the question is, how do you study systems of this kind? So given this, we can, the way we will introduce our grand canonical ensemble now. Remember that when the photon number was not conserved, we are summing over all photon numbers without introducing a chemical potential. Okay. So that is what we will generate, will generalize. Okay. So the definition of the grand canonical partition function now will be the following. We have sum over alpha e to the minus beta E alpha plus we will now introduce 2 chemical potentials which correspond to the conserved quantities. N1 tilde plus mu2 tilde beta N2 tilde. Okay. Only 2 conserved charges, N1 tilde and N2 tilde. So you have introduced 2 chemical potentials conjugate to those. But of course, I mean, if you start with this, you may wonder whether you have to redo the calculations. Okay, all the ideal Bose-Fermi gas partition function that you wrote down, right? You have to change them. Okay. Fortunately, you don't really have to redo the whole calculation because you can rewrite this in a form, okay, which goes back to the familiar form. Okay. So you can write this as sum over alpha e to the minus beta E alpha plus mu1 tilde beta. Okay. So let's write the explicit form of N1 tilde, that was Na minus Nb. Okay. And mu2 tilde beta times Na plus Nb plus Nc. Okay. So I can write this as sum over alpha e to the minus beta E alpha plus mu A Na plus mu B Nb plus mu C Nc, okay, where mu A is mu1 tilde plus mu2 tilde mu B is mu1 tilde minus mu2 tilde and mu C is just mu2 tilde. Is this clear?
I think it was 2 NC.
That was here there is a problem you are saying?
It was 2 NC, right? Na plus Nb plus 2 NC was 100.
Oh yeah, thank you. No, Na plus Nb plus Nc. Okay, let's go back. Yeah. See, it's because to begin with, right, N2 tilde was 2, right, here, A plus B, because Na is 1, Nb is 1, Nc is 0. In the final state is C plus C, so there are 2 C's, right? So Na is 0, Nb is 0, Nc is 2. So this is the conserved charge.
Okay, yeah.
So this is this which is conserved, right? If it was not 2 C's, right, but 1 C, then you have to put a half, or you have to put a 2 here. Yeah, so if it has A plus B going to C, then you have to put Na plus Nb plus 2 Nc. Is this okay?
Yeah.
Sir, mu b equals to mu2 tilde minus mu1 tilde, not mu1 tilde minus mu2 tilde.
This is mu b is, yes, you are right, I think. Mu b is mu2 tilde minus mu1 tilde. Thank you. Mu2 tilde minus mu1 tilde. Okay. So then we don't have to do the calculation again. We can still write as log qa plus log qb plus log qc. Okay, that's use the same formula that we used earlier. Okay, if these are ideal gas. Okay, except that you have to remember that in the argument, the mu a and mu b and mu c are not independent. Okay, they are given in terms of only two independent parameters, mu1 tilde and mu2 tilde. Okay, that's all you have to keep in mind. Okay, and now we will solve this by using the fact that n1 tilde beta n1 tilde beta is del mu1 tilde of log q and n2 tilde beta as del mu2 tilde of log q. Okay. So it basically means, okay, that you cannot supply Na, Nb and Nc as independent data, okay, because you don't know a priori, okay, how many A and B particles would have been converted to C particle. But these are independent data. N1 tilde and N2 tilde do not change. So for a given gas, we can specify what is the total N1 tilde value and what is N2 tilde value. Okay. So now you use these two equations. Okay, so Q is to begin with expressed as a function of mu A, mu B, and mu C, but then you use these to write this as a function of mu1 tilde and mu2 tilde. And then you solve this to find mu1 tilde and mu2 tilde. So then again, given the temperature and n1 tilde and n2 tilde, we can find mu1 tilde and mu2 tilde by solving these equations. Is this clear? So this is the way we treat mixture of many particles. So if this example is clear, I'll now write down the more general formula. Okay, how to deal with the general case. Are there any questions? Okay, so let's look at the general case. Okay. So let's suppose that we have k types of particles with L conserved charges, which can be less than or equal to k. Okay. So I'll write a general formula n tilde L as sum over I equal to 1 to k C Li. Okay, let me write CLi Ni. Okay, where this is the number of I type particle which is not conserved, and this is the Lth conserved quantity, Lth conserved charge. Okay, charge here means any quantity. Okay, just the particle number. Okay. So in that case, the Q would have to be defined as sum over alpha exponential minus beta E alpha plus beta times sum over L mu tilde L n tilde L. Okay. So basically, you are introducing one chemical potential for each conserved charge. Okay. But now the idea is that you can rewrite this in terms of n tilde L, we can write in terms of Ni, okay, and we can write this as sum over alpha exponential minus beta E alpha plus beta sum over I equal to 1 to k mu I ni, where mu I is sum over L equal to 1 to L C I L times mu tilde L. And I should have just said that these are some given numbers. The C's are just some given numbers. Okay, that depends on what particular combination of charges are concerned. Okay, that depends on the particular system that you're considering. Is this clear? Okay. So this again allows us to write log Q as sum over I equal to 1 to k log Qi. Okay. Again, you see that you don't have to do new calculations. We can use the same Qis that we had found earlier if these are free Fermi gas or Bose gas. Okay. Except that inside the argument of Qi, okay, the mu i's which enter the argument of Qis, okay, are not all independent. Okay. The mu i's are given in terms of this L independent mu tildes. Okay. These you have to think of as the independent variables. And now the idea is that we'll get the result for the n tilde L's. So maybe I can write here only. So n tilde L or beta n tilde L will be given by del del mu tilde L of log Q. Okay. So we have capital L equations in capital L unknowns, mu tilde L. So if you are given these n tilde L's, okay, which are of course conserved and they can provide they can be the input to the system, okay, then you can solve for the mu tilde L's in terms of these. Is this clear? Okay, so now we are going to apply this to cosmology. We want to apply this to cosmology. But before we do that, okay, we need to understand under what condition is it valid. So validity of thermodynamics or statistical mechanics in cosmology. Okay, so let's go through some of the points. So the first point is that we need large number of particles, thermodynamic limit. Otherwise, applying statistical mechanics doesn't make sense. Large number of particles. Okay. But large number of particles in what? Okay. So the idea is that because the thermal equilibrium, okay, can be present over a horizon size, okay, what we need is a large number of particles within the horizon volume. Okay. So look at the size of the horizon. Okay. We estimate the total number of particles that are present inside the horizon, okay, which you can do because you can calculate the number density of particles. And that number should be large in order for statistical mechanics to make sense.
This should not include the inflation horizon, right?
Well, it can also include the inflation horizon because thermal equilibrium is over the whole horizon. Right? But you can, if you want to be more careful, you can say it will include the horizon after inflation, right? Whatever horizon size you have gained after inflation, okay, it should be at least large within that size. Okay? But at this stage, for this part, it doesn't really matter because thermal equilibrium, we have argued, holds over the inflation horizon, right? Because the temperature is uniform over the inflation horizon.
But there is practically no interaction.
True, I agree. So the reason the thermal equilibrium that you can still use thermal physics is because somebody had set the temperature to be uniform anyway earlier.
Yeah, well, somebody, but
Inflation, right? Somebody means inflation. Inflation has set the temperature is equal earlier, right? So when you are talking about averaging, right, you are allowed to average over the actual full horizon, right? Because the temperatures we know, even though that uniformity is not because of the thermal equilibrium, right? That uniformity is because of the initial condition. Nevertheless, because the temperatures are the same, you are allowed to average over this size.
yeah, okay.
Okay, so you can take it to the full horizon, but it doesn't really matter. You can also take it to the horizon after inflation, okay? Because this is true in general. Okay, one can check that you don't have to really worry about this too much. Okay, the statistical description holds. The number of particles within a horizon volume, right? Even if you don't count the inflation horizon, is still large enough. Okay, in fact, I mean the original Big Bang theory was developed without using inflation, and it's still true there. Okay, so second point, okay, maybe I go to the new page. Thermal equilibrium. Okay. Now, this time it's okay. I'll explain what thermal equilibrium means. Okay. So this needs large number of energy changing collision per particle per Hubble time. Okay, so Hubble time here by definition is 1 over lambda dot. Okay. Roughly you can say Hubble time is a time over which the universe doubles in size, okay, or becomes a fraction of itself, expands by a fraction of the original size in the Hubble time. So that's the definition of Hubble time. Okay. And so this is roughly controlling the rate of expansion of the universe. Okay. And the point is that if we are allowed to, if you are to use thermal description, okay, namely the temperature falling with time and so on, okay, we have to make sure, okay, that there is enough exchange of energy between particles, okay, so that within one Hubble time, okay, the number of collisions is large, okay, and particles can come to thermal equilibrium. Okay. Otherwise, we cannot use the notion of thermal equilibrium because the universe is expanding, right? This is the time. So unlike in the normal statistical system, right, where in principle you can imagine that we wait for infinite time before it comes to equilibrium. Here you don't have infinite time, right? If we have to apply the notion of thermal equilibrium, it has to happen within a Hubble time, okay? Because otherwise the state of the universe itself has changed. Is this point clear? Okay. So each particle, okay, has to undergo a large number of collisions, okay? Not just large number of collisions, but large number of collisions which can change their energy, okay, within this Hubble time. Okay. This may fail. This may fail. This is not always true. May or may not hold. Okay. So if it fails, then we say that the particle has fallen out of equilibrium. Okay, or has decoupled. Now, similarly, chemical equilibrium requires large number of collisions per particle per Hubble time, that can change non-conserved charges. Okay. So let me explain what I mean by this. Okay. So let's consider the system ABC again. So I said that if you have A plus B going to C plus C, C plus C, okay, then NA, NB, NC are not conserved. Okay. But suppose it so happens that this rate is so small that within one Hubble time, a given particle has much less than one collision of this type. Okay. So in that case, even though abstractly we can say that this NA, NB, NC are not conserved, okay, for all practical purpose, we can treat NA, NB, and NC as conserved quantities. Is this point clear?
And you are saying they are individually conserved.
Yeah, so suppose this process, right, which can actually change the numbers, okay, is very rare, right? Within one Hubble time, such collisions are very unlikely to occur, right?
Yes.
In that case, we might as well assume that they are individually conserved, right? Because their numbers are not changing.
Okay.
So how we treat, right, whether you treat these as in three conserved quantities, okay, or as two conserved quantities, n1 tilde and n2 tilde, depends on the relative magnitude of this reaction rate and Hubble expansion rate. Okay. And furthermore, okay, this can change as a function of time. Because as the universe evolves, the expansion rate is changing, okay, the collision rates are changing, okay, because the densities are changing, the energies are changing, and so on. Okay. So it may happen that during some epoch we treat these as individually conserved quantities, and in some other epoch we treat n1 tilde and n2 tilde as conserved quantities. Okay, so this you have to keep in mind. Is this clear? The third point is the use of ideal gas equation of state. So this requires that collisions should be rare enough and interaction small so that most of the time the particles can be regarded as free. So this again is true much of the time, but not always. Okay, and so in the history of the universe, there could have been time periods in which one or more of the particles are strongly interacting, and you cannot use this, the ideal gas equation of state. You may still be able to use thermodynamics, okay, but the equation of state will be different, right? It will not be ideal gas equation of state, and you have to do more work to figure out what the equation of state is. So this again is something that you have to keep in mind.
Isn't this in contradiction with what we wrote earlier? Like there should be a lot of collisions in 1 by Hubble time.
Yes. So the point is that, yes, it's not contradiction, because rare versus lot, there can still be a large range, right? So it should be rare enough so that the interactions, so that the most of the time they are free, right? But nevertheless, they should be frequent enough so that within one Hubble time, you have enough number of collisions.
Okay.
Right? So these are not mutually contradictory, but it just shows that in cosmology, at least, you cannot take things for granted. You have to check the collision rate and see whether the assumptions that you have made are correct or not. Is this okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's go to cosmology. So let me set up the equations, and then we'll study their consequences next time. So suppose during some epoch in the history of the universe, n conserved charges. Okay. So now I'm going to write the conserved charges. Okay. Now we are talking about cosmology. So you are really evolving in a curved space-time. Okay. So the conservation laws I'll write as d mu j mu L equal to 0, with L equal running from 1 to capital L, and j mu L can be written as sum over I equal to 1 to k CLI JI mu, where these are the currents, or the 4 currents for density of ith type of particle. Okay, the number of particles of the ith type. Okay. So then what we are going to do is to introduce the chemical potential mu tilde L for each conserved quantity.
Isn't small l going from 1 to L, capital L, capital N?
Small L going to 1 to capital L. Yes.
No, we have N conserved charges. No, what?
Sorry, L conserved charge, right? N is something else, right? So let's call this L conserved charges. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Harshit, you had some question?
No, sir.
Okay. So let's go ahead and do some counting. So the number of variables in this case, okay, is lambda of T, okay, that we had already seen. We need to know the temperature. Okay, we are assuming thermal equilibrium, so common temperature T of T, okay, and mu tilde L of T, okay, with L runs from 1 to capital L. So that's altogether L plus 2 variables, right? Okay. Note that we are not counting cosmological constant, even if it's present. Not counting since that remains constant anyway. Okay, so now let's look at the equations, right? What equation do you have? Okay. First, you have lambda dot over lambda squared plus k over a0 square lambda squared equal to 8 pi g over 3 times rho. Okay. So rho is sum over I rho I, and this is of course given in terms of function of T and mu tilde Ls. Okay, to begin with, it was function of T and mu I, but mu i's can be found in terms of mu tilde Ls, as you saw. Okay, so it's a function of T and mu tilde L. Then we have energy conservation. This is a Friedmann equation. d dt of rho a cube is minus 3 a square a dot times p. Again, rho is sum over rho I and p is sum over IPI. Okay, sum of the pressures of individual particles, and pi's again can be written in terms of T and mu i's can be written in terms of the mu tilde Ls. Okay. So that gives you two equations. Okay. So we need L more equations. Okay. And so those L equations essentially come from the charge conservation. And the charge conservation, okay, is d mu JL mu equal to 0. And I'll leave it as an exercise to check that for FRW metric, this reduces to d dt of NL a cube equal to 0. Okay. This is the density of LH charge, okay, which more explicitly is given by sum over I CLI NI. Okay. And NI's of course are given as function of T and mu I, and mu i's are given as function of mu tilde. Okay, linear combinations of neutral line. Okay. So using these, okay, we get, this gives you L equations. Okay. So L equations here and two more, the Friedman equation and the energy conservation. So L plus 2 equations, okay, in L plus 2 unknowns. Okay. And this is what we'll use to solve for the time evolution of the system. Is this clear?
Isn't NL simply del by del mu tilde of log Q?
Yes, it is. Yes, but log Q, as I said, the easiest way to, I mean, unless you want to do the calculation all over again, right? Log Q, it's easiest to write it as sum over I log Qi. Right? Each Qi itself is a function of the Ni's, right? Ni's and T, and then you calculate it that way. But NL indeed, it is, I mean, del del mu L of log Q.
Yeah, okay.
Is it okay? Are there other questions? Okay, now let me just end by leaving you with an exercise. This I'll try to work out next time. Okay, but this you can easily check actually. So I'll urge you to do this exercise. Check that as a consequence of these L plus 2 equations, so S is the entropy density. So this is sum over I equal to 1 to K SI. Each SI is given as a function of T and mu I. Right? And mu I again you write as in terms of CL I mu tilde L. Okay. So we have the equations that determine the time evolution of T and mu tilde L. Okay. We have S as a function of T and mu tilde L via this root. Okay. And you have to check that d dt of S times A cube is 0. Right? This is what is called the entropy conservation. And this plays one of the key roles in understanding much of the history of the universe. Is this statement clear? Okay, so this is
Sir?
something. Yes, go ahead, please.
So is the statement of that entropy will always increase, is that violated here?
Well, entropy will always increase or remain constant, right?
Yeah,
And
but
because we are assuming thermal equilibrium, it's not surprising that it should remain constant. Right? You are not violating second law of thermodynamics. You are not saying that entropy is decreasing.
yeah,
But what you are saying is that even though the universe is a time-dependent system, right, as long as you use the equations that we have derived, the entropy in a one co-moving volume actually remains constant.
but overall this should not hold, right? I mean, in a real case.
Well, I mean, you have assumed thermal equilibrium, right? And as
Yeah,
we
that's what-
discussed, that thermal equilibrium, the assumption of thermal and chemical equilibrium, right, may fail. And if it does fail, then it could happen that the entropy will increase.
Okay.
Right? But as long as we assume thermal equilibrium, it follows as a consequence of these equations, the entropy remains constant. But this will be only during the epochs in which these assumptions are valid.
Okay.
Any other question?
Not from here. I had a question, different question. Like,
Okay, is it related to the cosmology or something else? Then I mean,
No, cosmology. Yeah.
cosmology. Okay, yeah. So go ahead.
Yeah, so we have an observation of this dissimilarity between and antiparticles, right?
Yes,
Like
yes.
observation. Even though we know that in quantum field theory or in standard model, the difference should remain a conserved charge. The like
Well,
n
it may or
matter,
may not. It may or may not. But go ahead.
it may or may not as in like
I mean,
I mean,
number of photons minus number of okay. Number of particles minus number of antiparticles may still change, right?
I mean, what is the dissimilarity then?
Meaning one particle may get converted to another particle, right?
Yeah, no, sum of all like matter minus antimatter.
Yeah. So the point is, if it is a conserved charge, if it's one of these n tilde L's, then it will remain conserved.
Like what do people say that there is more matter than antimatter in the universe then?
Yeah. So that's something that honestly explained, right? It was created sometime, and it had to be created after inflation.
Yeah.
So this is saying that at some point in the physical equations, right, the matter could be created. The matter minus antimatter cannot be an absolutely conserved quantity in the theory that describes us.
But it is a conserved quantity if we take standard model only.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah. So I was saying that if it were some process like through which there is this more matter being created than antimatter,
Yes.
it cannot be something like spontaneously broken symmetry or something.
Well,
Given that
things one can explore, right? I mean, why do you say it cannot be spontaneously broken symmetry?
yeah, I am saying that because like what I was saying in the earlier part of the class, that even though two differently separated points would have been close by, that is not the time when particles were being created. We need to justify the dissimilarity after inflation because,
Yes.
like as you said, everything before has been wiped out.
Yes.
So after that, there is no causal link between two very separated points. And
Yes.
spontaneously broken symmetry is sort of a statistical process that if it were to happen at every place in the universe, in some places more matter would be produced, in some places more antimatter would have been produced.
Yeah, but imagine that the inflation itself happened during a spontaneously broken phase, right? Suppose when the inflation was taking place,
Yeah,
the symmetry was already spontaneously broken.
but you pointed out, right, that it would have been wiped out.
No, but spontaneous symmetry breaking wouldn't be wiped out, right? Because spontaneous symmetry breaking means what? That some scalar field, which could have taken two different vacuum expectation values, right, within the one horizon, right, it takes only one of the two vacuum expectation values. That's possible, right?
Yeah, so in a different patch of inflation, there could have been more antiparticle, which we won't observe, but
Exactly. Yeah. That's certainly possible, right? So all we know is that within our horizon, right, observed horizon, there's more matter than antimatter.
yeah, okay.
Right? We don't know that if outside our horizon, there is no other, there may be another patch where there is more antimatter than matter.
Yeah, but we can sort of say that after the recombination time, the reheating phase,
Yes.
during the reheating phase, if there is something like a spontaneously symmetry broken thing, like some other theory, it cannot be part of the standard model because it would violate all that CPT invariance and all things. But
Yeah, it will not violate CPT invariance. I mean, we will study the production of matter over antimatter, right? And there are theories which can do that. So we'll study in detail how matter could have been created, right? More matter compared to antimatter could have been created. And of course, there are constraints that under what condition it could have been produced. So this is something we'll be studying in detail later.
all right. Also, in like, does string theory have this conservation of matter over and like, if matter and antimatter are present equally? Like in string theory, evolving it, do they still remain like equal proportion?
Well, basically in string theory, what one can argue is that there are no conserved global charges. So if there is a conserved charge, it better be a gauge charge, right? It should couple to some gauge fields. So typically, a matter-antimatter kind of asymmetry will be broken in string theory. But that doesn't mean that it provides a mechanism to create this in the universe, right? Because one has to make sure that the interactions are strong enough so that it can create it.
Okay.
So it's not enough that the fundamental theory has such some interactions that can produce this matter over antimatter asymmetry. There are many other conditions which have to be satisfied in order that it can actually happen in cosmology.
Yeah, but that part is a necessity, right? That there
That
should
part
be
is a
some-
necessity. Of course, if the charge is exactly conserved, right, then you cannot create it. So that's certainly a necessity, that there should be interactions that violate the charge that you want to violate. Right? If you are trying to create some excess of some charge out of nothing, right, then there better be interactions which violates that charge. Right? That's certainly a necessity.
Yeah. And also, since you just said that there are no global charges, like global charges as in charges like energy and all, which are like d0 mu d cube x.
No, these things, no, global charges, by global charges one means that charges which are not associated with gauge symmetries. Right? Like electric charge couples to gauge fields, right?
Yeah.
So those charges are okay. Those charges can be conserved, and they have to be conserved, in fact. On the other hand, the charges which do not couple to gauge symmetries are typically not conserved in string theory.
Like total momentum is sort of like a charge, right?
Yeah, but it couples to a gauge field, right? It couples to gravity. Gravity is a great gauge field from this perspective. Right? That's why it can be conserved.
Yeah. So T mu nu is still okay.
T mu is still okay because it couples to the metric.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other question?
What would be a charge that is not coupled to the field?
What would be?
Can you give any example of any charge that is not coupled to a gauge field?
See, typically, for example, as far as we know, that's number of baryons minus number of leptons is a conserved quantity in the standard model, but it's not coupled to a gauge field. There's no gauge field in the standard model which couples to B minus L, right? We'll define B and L later, but baryons roughly, the protons and neutrons, for example, have baryon number 1, right? All the leptons, like electrons, muons, they have baryon number 0. And lepton number, similarly, electrons, muons, these carry lepton number 1. The protons and neutrons don't carry any lepton number. So one can show, and this again we'll discuss in detail later, that B is in fact violated even in the standard model. But B minus L is conserved in the standard model. But it doesn't couple to any gauge field. So if it so happened that there is really no gauge field that couples to B minus L, then in string theory, this will not be conserved. So that's just an example of a charge in the standard model that doesn't couple to any gauge field, the B minus L.
In standard model, there is no possibility of introducing more non-scalar fields, right?
No, you can. I mean, the standard model by definition is something where you don't introduce anything else. Right? But you can extend the standard model within the framework of quantum field theory by adding more fields.
And by preserving anomalies and all that.
Yeah, of course, that's a consistency condition, right? That you have to preserve. You have to make sure that there are no anomalies.
Similarly, in string theory, there is a possibility of adding more fields. Like
No, in string theory, there is no such possibility. I mean, in string theory, you have to basically work with whatever you get.
Yeah, so once we have found out that this is it is baryon minus lepton number does not couple to any of the given fields, there is really no choice. Like
Okay, but in string theory, the point is that it has also many vacuum. Okay? Like it has a multiple scalar fields with many minima. Okay? And in different minima, I mean, as you have seen in the generic case, that when you expand the theory around different minima, it can have different physical properties. So in string theory, whereas you cannot add any new field, you can get lots of different kind of physics just by working around these different minima. And it could be that in one of these minima, there is a conserved charge called B minus L. In another minima, there is no such conserved charge and so on. And that can certainly happen.
Okay.
So it's not that we know which minima could possibly describe us, right? I mean, the hope is that there is some minima of string theory that has exactly the right properties that the standard model displays. But right now, we don't know of such a vacuum, such minima of the potential.
But charges which do indeed couple to gauge fields, they will be conserved all across, like all the minima.
Not necessarily, the gauge field may be spontaneously broken, right? So those charges will have no relic in some of the minima. Right? So I mean, some minima, the gauge fields may be broken. In some minima, gauge fields may not be broken.
Okay. But this like B minus L sort of a thing can in principle couple to a gauge field.
Yes,
in
it
some
can.
other minima.
Yeah, it can. I mean, that can be, it's certainly possible that it's coupled to a gauge field.
All right.
Okay, I guess I have to stop because I think that there's a class after this. So we'll then continue on Sunday night. Okay.